All right, guys. So we're moving on to the next lesson. Today we're gonna do what's called factoring completely. Okay, so if you guys see that phrase, factor completely, it means, and I'm giving you a hint. So when you guys take your quizzes, it is a hint that you guys are gonna do two different types of factoring. Okay, so let's take a look. There's a good old Frodo. So what are we going to learn? We're going to learn how to factor out the GCF and then X factor. Okay, again, this helps us when we're graphing and finding x-intercepts. And how do we know if we've accomplished today's what? Well, given a polynomial, more specifically a quadratic, we will be able to factor out the GCF and then X factor. So here's the first example we're going to do is this one here. Okay, so we know it's a quadratic. And as you can see, there is a GCF between all three terms. Okay, but let's get to it now. Okay, so sometimes we can factor out a GCF, and then once we're done with that, we can continue factoring with X factor. Okay, so here's what I'm talking about. So notice here it says factor completely. So we have this quadratic, okay, and if you see the term or the phrase factor completely, well, look at all three terms and determine if there's something you can take out. Okay, this has an x squared, this has an x, this doesn't. So I know there's no x I can take out. But there's a 2, there's a 10, and there's a 12. So they're all even numbers, which means I can at least take out a 2. And it just happens to be that you can take a 2 out of every single one of these terms. Okay, so step one is to factor out the GCF. And looking at all three terms, we can factor out a 2. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and factor out a 2. So remember, when you factor out a 2, you're actually dividing each of these terms by 2. So if I divide that by 2, I get x squared. If I divide that by 2, I get 5 with an x. And if I divide that by 2, I get 6. Now, step 2 is to x factor. Okay, so let's look inside here and see if this is x factorable. It's a quadratic. Okay, we got a 6 and a 5. It looks like it. So let's fill out our x. Remember, it's a times c, so 1 times 6. And then b's on the bottom, so that's a 5. Now we need two numbers that multiply to 6 that also add to 5. Okay, some students say 6 and 1, but you would need one of them to be negative to be 5, and then by multiplying, you wouldn't get a positive 6. So the other option is 3 and 2, and 3 times 2 is 6, and 3 plus 2 is 5. Divide by 1, because that's our a value, and then 3 divided by 1 reduces to 3, and we get x plus 3, and then 2 divided by 1 reduces to 2. We end up with x plus 2. Now, don't forget that we had initially factored out a 2. So there's still a 2 in front. So don't forget the 2. Okay, so this right here is the factored form of this. If I multiplied this out, I would end up with this. Okay, so that is the factored form. They are both exactly the same. Okay, let's look at another one. So factor completely. So I'm going to test for a GCF. We have x squared and x, no x, so there's no x's we can cancel, that we can factor out. We have a 6, a 15, and a 9, and I think 3 goes into each of those. Okay, so factoring out the GCF, I think the GCF is 3, and it is. So we're going to factor out a 3. Okay, so if I factor out a 3 here, means, remember, we're dividing each term by 3. 6 divided by 3 is 2, but there's an x squared. Negative 15 divided by 3 is negative 5, but with an x. And then negative 9 divided by 3 is negative 3. Okay, so step 2 is to x factor with what's inside here, because this is our quadratic. Okay, so a times c is on top. So 2 times -3 is -6. -5 is on the bottom. And again, we're encountering the 6 and 5 thing. Okay, 3 times 2 is 6, and 3 plus 2 is 5. But if they were both negative, I would add to get a -5, but I would multiply to get a +6. So I know 3 and 2 aren't going to be my factors. But if I do 6 and 1, I know that -6 times 1 gives me -6, and when I add them, I end up with -5. Okay, don't forget to divide by your a value right here, this 2. So I'm going to divide by 2. And remember, you reduce if possible. So -6 divided by 2 reduces. And don't make it 3 over 1. Okay, it's 3. Because 2 goes into 6 evenly. And 1 divided by 2, that doesn't reduce. So we'll leave it as 1/2. So we got this x minus 3. We got this x plus 1/2. But remember, we want to bring that 2 over. Don't forget the 3. That's again, don't forget the 3. We want to bring that 2 over. And we end up with 3 times the quantity x minus 3 times the quantity 2x plus 1. And again, if I multiplied this out, I would end up with what we have here. Okay, so one thing is, don't forget that GCF, that number that you take out at the beginning. Students do this, and then they focus so much on this x factor that when they're done x factoring, they forget to put the 3 in front. Okay, because if you didn't have that 3, there's no way you're going to get that right there if you multiply it out. Okay, so one more example. Okay, this one's a little bit different. Can you identify what looks different about this compared to the other two examples? Yep, you got it. There's an x on each of the terms. So when I factor out the GCF, I know I can take an x out of each term, because this one has 3, this one has 2, and this one has 1. So the most I can take out is just 1, because that's the least amount of x's on this term. Okay, but there's something else. I got a 3, I got a 15, I got an 18. Okay, and they are all divisible by 3. So my GCF is actually 3x. Okay, so let's factor it out. So remember, you divide. So I divide it out. So 3 divided by 3 is 1. And then x cubed divided by x means I take one of those x's away. So it's going to be x squared. 15 divided by 3 is 5. I have 2. I take 1 away, which gives me 1, so I have 5x. And then -18 divided by 3 is -6. The x's cancel, so I get -6. Step 2 is the x factor. And look at this, 5 and 6 again. Actually, this is good because we're getting the experience with the different ways you can combine 6s and 5s. Sometimes it's 6 and 1, sometimes it's 3 and 2. Okay, so we've got a -6 because a times c is -6. 1 times -6. b is 5. So think about it. Okay, are we going to use the numbers 3 and 2, or are we going to use the numbers 6 and 1? And in this case, it is going to be the numbers 6 and 1, but it's going to be 6 and -1. And then we divide by our a value, which in this case is 1. 6 divided by 1 is 6. -1 divided by 1 is 1, so we have an x plus 6 there. Gives me -1. And then don't forget the 3x. Don't forget the 3x. Okay, so my answer is all of that. And so multiplying all of that out will give us this here. Okay, so again, if you see the phrase factor completely, you're going to do two different types of factoring. You're going to start with GCF and then move on to X factor. Okay, so that'll be my hint. Okay, but we should always check before we start any problem with factoring. We should always check for a GCF. That should always be our first step. Okay, when you get to Algebra 2, you'll have to do that all on your own. You'll have to know. There'll be no hints. Okay, so hopefully those three examples helped you guys out, and you can always rewind and take a look again. All right, but you guys have these two problems for homework, and they're on your notes there, so go ahead and get those done. And thanks for watching.